Good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday. I'm back at it here. Got my coffee, got my lipstick stain on my coffee already. So I get quite a few questions that you send me in kind of in the comments from previous weeks or that you email over to me for the week. So lots of questions to cover. So I'm going to kind of dive right into it. So thank you for joining. Oh, Aunt Josie, you're sick. I'm finally getting over. They finally told me I had walking pneumonia. So I finally got some really good medicine. And I'm finally over being sick over 6 weeks. It's been crazy. So I hope you're feeling better. Hello from England. Seriously, every day since we got back, at least 2 to 3 times a day, my 4-year-old comes up to me and says, okay, what's going on in England right now? Because she gets that it's a different time zone. So she just wants to know what's happening there now that she's not there. And she told me yesterday she wants to go back when she's not feeling sick because the girls were tragically sick while we were there, but we still did a lot. So dive into funeral questions, guys. Sam Smith is sick too. Goodness, guys, no sickness. So I had somebody asking me, their parents have some grave spaces and they're not going to use them, wondering if they could sell them. So I kind of asked around across the country, different kind of practices of cemeteries, because I know near me, there's one cemetery that will purchase the graves back, but they'll pay you what you paid for them. So you're not getting a lot back. They're not worth, that to them to pay a lot to them. And someone explained it to me really well that if every cemetery bought back grave spaces that people didn't want, it wouldn't be a profitable business at all. It wouldn't be a good venture for them to do that, because with the rise in cremation, a lot of people aren't going to use the grave spaces they've maybe had for 50 years or more. So often what you want to do is maybe pass them on or sell them to somebody else or will them or gift them. However, it needs to be tracked. And that's the thing that the cemetery is concerned about. So let's say I have a grave space and I decide I'm not going to use it because it's at a cemetery I'm not going to go to. So I want to give it to Joe Smith down the road. Well, when Joe Smith dies and his family go to the cemetery and say, oh, well, Kari Northey gave Joe Smith this grave space for him to use. They don't know that I have legally given it to him or that I authorized giving it to him, even though maybe I scratched out my name and put his name on it. So it needs to be done on the title with the cemetery so they know it has been transferred over. At that time, though, the cemetery may charge a transfer fee for the title to be transferred and then refiled. So that's where the cemetery may charge you more for in that instance. But technically, it's your grave property. It is your land. It's your little piece of land that you own out in the world. So it's yours to kind of do with what you want, but you do need to transfer title appropriately on it so that somebody can actually use it down the road. Oh, Trump's over there, and it's election time in England. I knew the election was coming up, and it was kind of a big deal. We had heard about that when we were over there. Yeah, David P., I am working. It's been with sick kids home and holidays. I haven't had a lot of editing time. I made a list of videos to edit the other day, guys. It's so long. I'm so excited about the content that will come from it. Oh my goodness, the list is long. So I just need some good time in the office to get some stuff done. Now, someone else was asking about funeral directors, or more specifically embalmers, who don't wear gloves, because Little Miss Funeral and I had talked about this in our session when we had sat down together. And I think maybe something was misconstrued about fingers going down throat to remove the jugular, which you can't get to the jugular going down the throat. It's, your throat's enclosed and the jugular is out in your tissue outside of it, out here. However, yes, there are some embalmers that still don't wear gloves, and I don't understand. It's so yucky. Yeah, there's too many diseases, too many factors, too many things. Just the touch alone and getting stuff on your nails and yuck. But I'm not sure if what you're talking about. So when you make the incision, what can happen is some embalmers will go in through the incision and will cut the trachea inside or the esophagus. They cut all the tubes here so that if there's purge, it can't get up to the mouth and the nose. I don't know if that's what you were talking about, but that could be it. I did not visit Highgate Cemetery in London. In London itself, in London proper, we just did kind of a general quick tour around, went up to Buckingham Palace really quickly. So we didn't do a lot in London. We tried to stay outside of London if we could, just to enjoy kind of the countryside and the smaller towns of England. I had a question. If there's a double headstone with the names already on them, so let's say the man dies, and so the wife puts up a headstone that has his name and her name on it, and then the wife remarries and is buried elsewhere. What happens with that headstone and with that grave space? Great question. I have, honest to goodness, never been asked this, I don't think, during this whole time. So I'm always really excited when you guys challenge me. Not challenge, but ask new things. So here's what can happen. That grave space can then be used by anybody. The headstone, though, you would have to, if able, do a fill of the name and then re-engrave over it with somebody else's, or you just leave it be and leave it be there, or put a plaque over it with somebody new's name if you're going to bury somebody else there. But there's no reason to just discard it because the person's name's there, even though they're not buried there. This does happen where, maybe a widower loses somebody when they're in their 70s, and then they meet somebody else and actually are married to them for 10, 15 years, a substantial amount of time. Then they go and be buried with that secondary spouse. So this does happen. Not as often, but it does happen. So you'll find in the interview I have with Nadal, who's the young widow that I interviewed last week, her and I talked about, making that decision, especially, at what age do you kind of decide not to put your name on a headstone? Because if you're in your 50s, even 60s, you may still get married again. You may still have a future spouse or significant other that you are with for a long duration. So do you choose to have a headstone with one name of the deceased, or do you put your name on with them because you plan to be buried there? It's just something you have to decide when you're doing that stone at that time, and whatever you feel is the right thing to do. It's all about your initial feeling, your gut reaction to the moment and what you want to do. And that was kind of the secondary is then which spouse do you get buried next to? How do you choose? And it's all about your family. Because here's the thing is when you die, then your kids or your new spouse are going to be the ones deciding where you're going. If, let's say, your first husband dies and is buried, and then your second husband dies, and then you die, then your kids are deciding. Are they going to place you with their dad, or are they going to place you with your new husband? Some of that's going to depend on relationships. Did they like your new spouse? Had you talked about it? Had you shared those interests and those desires with your kids, or with, who's going to be making the decisions as to where you want to go? That's the factor, is deciding kind of what you want to do and letting your family know. Can a body that has some decomp ever be viewed as a visitation? Yes, they can. Even with discoloration, airbrushing of cosmetics covers it all up. It's like a spray paint covering on the person. So you can cover up the color completely. Yes, you might have a smell factor, but even just to have a viewing with a family If we do some special treatments and stuff, we should be able to at least get to the point that the family can see the person and then have a closed casket or cremation. Why do corpses, I viewed all, look like their mouths have been molded to look sad, like the corners look like they've been pulled down? Yeah, you get the, exactly right. It's kind of that clown effect, the sad clown. I don't know. I don't know what embalmers are doing when they're doing that, because some people's mouths are just predisposed for that slump of the mouth. However, it's a gravity thing that when you're embalming, you can do this and it can cause a lift, and you can also create the prominence here. So you're not going to get like a full-on smile maybe, but you can at least keep from that sort of thing going on. Also, when people apply cosmetics, they don't always do it correctly. So we have a weather line on our lips, and what'll happen sometimes is when the cosmetic is applied, it's applied fully on all the lip portion. Well, when you put on lipstick, you don't put it way out there, and that's a common mistake that is done. It kind of bevels in here. And so that is something to really give attention to detail on, is making sure you're not putting too much lip coverage out on areas that don't get lip coverage or never would get lip coverage if the person was alive. And you can also create an upward just with lip coloring by coloring kind of the areas you want to create certain effects, so to speak. It's kind of like with your eyes. I have very hooded eyes, but if you highlight in the right areas, you can bring your eyes open a little more. Same with lips. You just can directionalize, if that's a word, them as you're coloring them. Yes, Beth, I am right here talking to you, girl. I am online, live and in action. When my brother was buried, the cemetery gave us the option to have him buried deeper so another person can be buried on top. Are there 2 vaults and everything? Does it all fit? Yes. If you're in a country that uses vaults. So like in England, double depth is very common because you use the grave space, but they don't often use vaults there. Here we would do a double depth vault or a crypt. So the vault is already in the ground, and there's just it's one big, huge, deep vault with one piece of concrete that is laid in the middle. So it's not 2 vaults stacked. It's just one vault with a divider, so to speak. So it depends on the cemetery that you're in, how they do that sort of a setup. Oh, Wayne, that's really cool that you got to serve on the Air Force Honor Guard. It's neat. Whoop, whoop. Tablets is up at PIMS. Restorative Art Lab. So slow but sure, girl, and don't connect out the sides of the lips. That's one of the biggest things I see with restorative art. When you create the lips, is you kind of create this whole outward thing. Remember, they taper inwards, not full on out. How long does embalming fluid last in human remains? There's no way to know. There's too many factors. pH of the body, pH of the water, drugs that the person was on in terms of like, not like crack or anything, but were they on morphine? Were they on chemo? Were they on radiation? All those things play into a factor. So there's no timeline. Hello in West Virginia. Here, why is it when you're dying, the bottom of your ears goes inward? I don't even know what that means, Matt. Like this, your lobe? You'll have to explain that. Hey, Morgan in Kalamazoo, you're like 20 minutes away from me, girl. That's so crazy. What causes the body to smell after embalming? Not a chemical smell either. More or less an awful but weirdly sweet smell. Would this be decomp? There was an autopsy too. The autopsy smell, so it has nothing to do with the embalming, autopsy. The autopsy smell is so very distinct. I talk about this often in videos, so I don't want to go into it too much again, but the body is in a cooler at the morgue, at the medical examiner coroner's office, typically for sometimes days, several days. They're often interconnected chambers in that cooler. So the smell from one person kind of gets into the other person. Think about your refrigerator. When you put like a big block of garlicky cheese or something and you put some bread, that bread is going to start tasting or smelling like garlicky cheese. Smells permeate into each other. So if you have bodies that are decomp in there that have been in there for months waiting to be claimed or something, that smell is also going to get permeated into every other body that's in there. Also, there's a lot of blood exposure inside of that cooling area. Blood has a very strong, potent smell that unless it's in a large quantity, you don't ever really smell it. But it is strong and it is coppery and it is a little sweet and pungent. So that also is an overwhelming smell. So between just the cooler funk is what I'll call it, and the blood smells, and then you get the chemicals and you get, just the reaction. There is a lot of smells going on and it's very distinctly autopsy. Don't know how else to explain it. Hey, Chris Miller, thank you. I appreciate that support. I always wonder, like, what do funeral directors think of Crazy Kari, talking on YouTube, but I appreciate that support. That's awesome. We could smell the formaldehyde. This person had a lot of restorative work done due to a suicide. To pick out the smell of formaldehyde, you would really need to know what formaldehyde smells like. And most people have never smelled formaldehyde unless they have opened a straight bottle of fluid. And then still, it's not really just formaldehyde. There's a lot of vehicles within it to move around the formaldehyde. So to say you smell formaldehyde, you wonder if that's really what you're smelling due to a suicide. Probably because they had an autopsy and all the chemicals and all the stuff I had just talked about as well. Thank you guys so much. It's kept refrigerator for 2 weeks. Would it still be okay for the family to view? Tracy, it should be. The person is going to be probably very discolored, very mottled, which means very like, picture you take 2 types of clay and just mold them together just a little bit. Well, mottled. Think about meat, where you look at the fat within like a piece of meat, where you get this, like, that's marbling, but kind of the same thing. You get white and this purple spots and some red and all sorts of different discoloring that is just natural and is going to be more prominent because of being in the cooler. You're also going to get some dehydration. I can't believe I just talked about marbling on meat, guys. Oh my goodness. What places my head go to try and figure out examples for you guys. So sorry. But just discoloration, sometimes dehydration. Sometimes the lips will get really thin and dehydrated out because of the cooler. But otherwise, the person should be okay, I would think, unless there was some extreme circumstances. That's interesting, Matt. Yeah, I don't know. Earrings and I noticed that on my grandma and dad. I have no idea. I've never seen that on a person where they've rolled. Hunched back. Oh, yes. So no, we don't break the spine. No spine breaking. So if someone has a severe hunched back, my grandma did, we really just position them. We use a lot of pillows, a lot of, height up on the head. So that way they are laying as flat as we can get them to lay, just by balancing out with different stacking in the other areas with the pillows. And, we might use some rolled towels, things like that. I've never used, there's no such thing as a 2-person casket. Well, I won't say that because there's that, 3-person casket down in the museum. But you would use like a quadruple oversized casket. So you could put 2 adults together. No, I've never done it. I've always said I would want to do it if me and my husband died together, that we would both just go in one casket. So you would just need an extreme oversized casket to fit both people. Same if you were burying an adult and a child. They may fit in a standard size casket, but you might just get an oversized rather than 2 separate caskets. Hey, how are you doing? So a 6-point injection. A point is an opening where you get to the vessel. So like if you just raised the carotid and the jugular, that is a 1-point injection. However, you may need to do more points. What is common is doing the femorals, which are on either side of the groin, or the radials, which are in the wrist, right here, or the carotids, which are here. So that would be maybe a common 6-point, is raising the 2 here, the 2 in the wrists, and the 2 femorals. You have a myriad of other that you can do. You can do an axillary, which is, I need to sit down my coffee. You can do an axillary, which is here. You could do a tibial in your shin. You could do a subclavian, which you would do like a bra strap to raise out here, to raise your carotid and your subclavian together. So there's all sorts you can do, but every time you make an incision to open is a point. So if you raise 6, then you have a 6-point. Hey, Beth. Yes, the flameless cremation video. There is no price difference. So the places that I have looked at, it's the same price as a flame cremation. The difference is typically transport, because you often are going to need to go a greater distance to get to the facility because there's not that many. You're going to pay for transportation to get to there. That really is going to be your only other cost. Otherwise, it should be right about the same ballpark. If someone dies from AIDS, can the living get it from a dead person? I always wondered that. So I would have to look at where the research is at now. It's changed over the years. They have some research has found that it can die pretty quickly, but others have found that the bugs still live. It can still live quite a bit of time after the person is dead, as long as there is cells and stuff, I guess, that it can incubate. I don't know. I need to look into it and see where they're at with the research now, because I haven't looked at it in so long. We just protect as if every person is infected with something. We just take precautions. So it doesn't bother us. Like, when AIDS and HIV first became a thing, it was terrifying to funeral directors and embalmers. And so they were embalmed almost like a contagious Ebola outbreak or something. It was pretty radical because it was such a fearful, unknown thing. But so we just take precautions. And so it really doesn't play into it as much as it used to. So you could take your plans to a funeral director. It doesn't mean that they're going to be followed through. It depends on your state. Your next of kin has to carry them out, depending on the state. So we've talked about before that, like with cremation in Michigan, I can't authorize my own cremation. I can't request my own cremation. I can prearrange and pre-fund and everything towards cremation, but my family has to authorize it after I die, or I have to designate somebody who's going to follow through with my wishes for sure. If I file a will, then if somebody is contesting what my family wants to do, they could call a emergency court hearing, and the judge could then look at my will where it may have my requests in it, and then can, tell the funeral home to follow a court order to have me cremated. So there's a few different avenues and types, but it just depends on the state you're in, whether or not your wishes can really be enforced. Oh, Tracy, I'm sorry. All right. Hey, Daniel. All right. Is a casket or coffin burned with cremation? I keep getting this question a lot. Yes. What the person is viewed in or what they're put in for cremation, they are burned in or cremated in. I hate saying they're burned. They're cremated in. If they're in a rental casket, the insert or the part that they are actually touching is a one-time use. That is not the rental part, just the shell of the casket. So that insert is taken out with them in it. A lid is put on. They are taken to the crematory in that. So yes, a person is cremated inside of something. I just did a career day, actually. A lot of schools don't have career days anymore, or they don't have that same setup like they did back when I was a kid. I love doing career days just because I love talking about this, obviously. I love talking about the business, and I love talking about how to get into it and why I love it and why you shouldn't be scared of a funeral director. I'm not scary. Come on. And so I kind of like breaking through and kind of bursting that little bubble of stereotype and the fear that might be there. And so I like career day for that. I like speaking to classes. I love speaking to classes at different age levels. I've gone to, I think the youngest I went to was third grade, maybe. Very different what I talk about than maybe a middle school or high school. But I have found that the questions are so varied within the different age ranges that middle school is really where fun questions are asked because kids are really honest still, like young kids, but they're also asking more informed, curious, logical questions that are a little more adult. So they're that really awesome balance of just asking whatever's out in their mind or in their heart and asking really deeper questions. Love it. Love the middle school. So I would like to do more of that. It's just not something that's out there. I've called some schools and said, hey, I'm here if you need a funeral director or embalmer to come chat for, your class, because they don't even have as much the home ec where you talk about birth and you talk about weddings and that stuff and how to balance a checkbook and, then talk about death. They don't do that as much anymore. During cremation, does the body sit up? No, not that I've ever seen. Can't say it's never going to happen, but if the body sat up, typically they're gonna hit the roof of the retort, and it's not really big enough for somebody to sit up in. So the extreme embalming, we get asked about this because it's always in the news. There's so few people that are actually doing this type of embalming. To me, there's a huge liability. You've got a body that's upright and is in a positions that can much more easily purge and fall over and all the stuff that could happen with it. I don't think I would sleep until that person was buried, because there's so many factors that could go wrong within those situations. I would love to attempt it. But the people that do that kind of embalming are pretty tight-lipped about how they are doing what they're doing. I don't think it's happening like all the time at a lot of places. Is it true a take-home check of a funeral director is roughly around $1,500 to $3,000 in New York State? So who gets the other $4,000 and or $5,000 go due to being charged? All right, let's talk about how a business runs then. If we're gonna talk money, it takes money to run a business. It takes money to run a business that is a 24/7 business. You could have 0 calls for a month, but the funeral home still needs to be open. The lights still are on. You still have staff on call. You still have staff in an office. They're all being paid regardless if there's a funeral or not. So you take your overhead expenses of a business, you take what you're paying out every month for bills to run just the facility to be functioning, for replacement of use of items over time, for staff, all of that. Then you put that as you break it down over how many calls you might have during the year. Each family is then charged that overhead within their basic service charge. You then factor in all of the expenses towards that funeral itself, the manpower just to focus on that one service, the cars that are running for it, the staff that's working just for that service, on top of just the everyday stuff that people are doing. Then you have to purchase the merchandise, and then the cash advances are factored in there. So there's not somebody getting that other 4,000 to 5,000. It's all accounted for. There truly is not a huge revenue in funeral service. It is a huge expense. Look at a wedding. A wedding is $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. A funeral is going to be reflective of that same type of thing because it's a huge event. You are hosting a huge event for all your friends and family, and you have professionals who have been specifically trained to handle deceased, specifically trained for all of the stuff that we have to do behind the scenes, and have all the vehicles for it. They're washed, they're ready, they're in good condition. I have 200 chairs that are always going to be functioning and ready to use, a PA system, a music system, carpets are nice, coffee is ready, bathrooms are cleaned. All of that has to be ready every single family, every single time. When you call at 2 a.m, someone is available, answering that phone, ready to come, ready to serve your family. There's cost in that. So it may sound like I get defensive, but I'm going to, because this is attacked a lot within the funeral business. Why do we have certain charges? Why does a direct cremation cost, it could cost $1,000? And I have people tell me, I don't understand why you charge so much. The question is, how much should a direct cremation, how much do people think a direct cremation should cost? $100? We have to run a high power EPA monitored facility for the cremation itself. We have staff that's available 24/7, staff that is going to track down a doctor, track down a medical examiner, take care of your loved one, remove a pacemaker if necessary, make the phone calls, transport them to the funeral home, to the crematory, back to the funeral home, back to your family. Sometimes spend all the time on on the phone with life insurance, or tracking down signatures from your family members who are across the country. There's time and effort, but people don't see. If somebody doesn't see value, I can't make you see value in it. So I do get a little defensive because I think people don't understand, but they don't want to understand. If you don't see value in being a funeral director and us taking care of the dead, then you're not going to. But I always like to ask, what do you do for a living? And if somebody asks me those type of things, because often it's somebody that maybe doesn't work or, doesn't dive in. So I just went down a huge segue, but that type of a question saying who gets that other money because you're obviously charging a lot kind of thing really gets me fired up. Sorry, guys. And, I have no idea what a take-home check of somebody in New York State. I don't talk to people about what they make. The funeral director, it depends on the area you work, how much experience, what your on-call schedule is, how many days a week you work. It's a good average. Some funeral directors make between $20 to $40 an hour, depending if you broke it down. But if you're on call or if you're salaried, you may make $10 an hour if you're working an 80 to 100-hour week, or you may make more an hour depending on how your work schedule is. So it's really varied. It's too much to even give any specifics. So it's a great question to ask. How do you know the cremated remains are of your actual loved one? Because we did have that big thing down in Georgia back in 2002-ish or so, where the guy was throwing all the bodies out in the woods and giving kitty litter and all this stuff back to families. It's a great question to ask because you do want to ensure that it is your loved one that comes back. Typically, a crematory will give, as soon as your loved one gets there, they get a tracking number. That is their number that follows them. All their paperwork will have that identification on it. Their paperwork and their tag will stay with them. So there's typically a metal tag. Sometimes it's in with a cremation. Sometimes it hangs outside the retort and it stays there. And everything is tracked and everything is cataloged as it goes through. So there's a pretty solid tracking system within the process. I can't speak for every single crematory, but I have been in and worked around several, and they all typically have the same system in place and set up so that they know, and the funeral homes that work with them know, that who they receive back is their loved one. I'm going to do just 2 more questions, guys. Woo! You guys are full of really good questions this week. Is it true the bodies in morgues can pee poop, have erections in them, and fart? What causes it if it happens? Yes, you can pee, poop, fart, whatever. There's gas that builds up in your system. When that gas builds up, it comes out. So there's your fart. If a body still has excrement or urine, when the body relaxes and decomposes, it can come out. So yes, we got some pee and poop. And erections. An erection is a muscle response. So you can't get it up if there's no muscle reacting. However, sometimes between gas and different things, it may appear to be an erection. Thank you guys so much for the support. One last question from Ryan. Do you have to use eye caps? No. Suture the mouth? No. And do makeup 100% of the time? Or is there good people that don't require it? I don't know what that means, good people that don't require it. So eye caps help us to just keep the eyes closed and help give a shape to the eye. Eyeballs dehydrate pretty quickly after somebody dies. Just like everything, there's a lot of dehydration. And so if they sink in, then you get sunken eyes, which is not great when a family sees the person and their eyeballs are flat and in. So the eye cap gives a rounded look as well. Suturing the mouth or using a needle injector to keep the mouth closed helps to keep from happening, because it can happen. The mouth may be closed up tight from rigor and maybe locked and may appear great. However, after 2-3 days, if the person is not embalmed, that tissue gets soft, the rigor goes away, the mouth can fall open. So how would you feel? Let's just say you're viewing grandma and all of a sudden her mouth drops open because we didn't suture. Not always the best thing. And do makeup. Makeup just depends. If we can give a little color back if we need to, especially in lips. Lips discolor pretty quickly also. So sometimes just the lips need a little color. But thank you guys. I really appreciate it. That looked good, that you think everybody will look okay. Okay, cool, Ryan. That much better definition of good people. I didn't know if you meant good embalmers or good. Yeah, so sometimes, like I said, people's eyes are closed, their mouths are closed, their coloring's not bad, but come back 12 hours later, their eyes are popped, the mouth is open, and they're all sorts of blotchy or mottled. So a person can change very rapidly in their appearance. They may appear good for a while and then go bad. Doesn't mean they need to be embalmed, but definitely a few things to help with their viewability is not a bad thing. So thank you guys for joining me. I will see you next Wednesday morning again. So shoot over questions if you have them. Email them over to Kari@KariNorthey.com. I will watch for those. If you like what you hear, invite somebody to watch next time or share a video. Get more people to be educated about the funeral business. Make sure people are not going to be taken advantage of and misled and not know what to do when the time comes. So I always like to tell people, go to my arrangement video if you know that you are going to be making arrangements soon, and try and get yourself prepared for going in and being in that moment, meeting with the funeral director. And if you're a veteran, see what your veteran benefits are and go check out my veteran video. But make sure you pass on the information. If it's valuable to you, it's going to be valuable to somebody else. So see you guys next week. And I got to work on using the word so. A couple people are calling me out on that. It's just my go-to word, I guess. So. But hopefully you guys have a good week, a good weekend, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.